Hey everyone, last week WWE held their first ever all-women's pay-per-view, Evolution. Though the build and promotion for it was hot garbage, the show itself largely exceeded expectations, giving us some incredible moments, including arguably one of the best women's matches the company's ever had. Overall, it was a good day for women's wrestling. In my opinion, this show was the apex of what I call the second wave of the WWE Women's Evolution. See, the first wave was the initiative to focus on improving the quality of matches for women in the company and presenting them as more than vapid, titillating eye candy. We've been seeing the second wave play out on main roster and NXT programming for the last couple of years. More time for matches, main eventing television, and pay-per-views, all building up to Evolution. The only way they could top that would be to have an all-women's main event for WrestleMania, which could still possibly happen. Evolution was a great step in the right direction for the female empowerment movement in the company, but now I feel it's time to start building to what I call the third wave of the evolution, intergender wrestling. Ah yes, I can already hear those keyboards clickety-clacking. I'm here to tell you that there is nothing inherently wrong with intergender wrestling and that WWE should consider gradually integrating it back into their programming. The fact is, you'd be hard-pressed to find a single female wrestler who hasn't at least trained with men, much less had a match with them, so why not make it part of the show? After Evolution, I made the mistake of expressing these thoughts on Twitter and got some blowback for it. Of all the reasons and examples and excuses I was given, there are only 3 that I consider valid counter-arguments to an intergender revival in the company, which I will list now. Number 1, the sponsors wouldn't like it. WWE may not act like it, especially in the case of this whole Saudi Arabia kerfuffle, but they are very image conscious. It may be hard to court lucrative sponsorships if part of the programming includes men and women on the opposite ends of the ring as opponents. Detractors say intergender wrestling is akin to domestic violence, a fallacy I'll get to in a minute, but because of that, it could hypothetically create a negative PR hit. Number 2, WWE would ruin it. Every once in a while, WWE is able to pull off some really cool event or moment that meets or exceeds the hype, but they're also known for having golden opportunities fall into their lap and totally squandering them. There's a fear among fans that if the company did intergender wrestling, they'd find some way to taint it or make it difficult to get behind, which is totally plausible. Number 3, intergender wrestling makes fans uncomfortable. Look, I get it. A man hitting a woman or vice versa is shocking to do or see done to someone. We've had it ingrained in our brains and our society that it's simply unacceptable. If your biggest hurdle to enjoying intergender wrestling is that it feels icky to you, that's okay, I won't judge you for it. But for those of you with other objections, I have some words. The most common complaints I've heard against intergender wrestling are as follows. It's biology. Men have more muscle mass and are stronger than women. A larger man would never lose to a smaller woman. And perhaps most bafflingly, many fans say it wouldn't be realistic or logical for a woman to compete with, much less defeat, a man in the ring. Oh really? In 2018, wrestling fans suddenly give a shit about what's believable? In New Japan, we'll see a guy take 3 dozen V-triggers in a match and no one questions why he didn't die of a brain hemorrhage in the ring. In Mexico, luchadors do some of the flippiest, wackiest shit imaginable and their opponents just stand there waiting to catch them. In WWE, you have an undead supernatural cowboy biker and his demonic half-brother with a boring government job taking on 2 middle-aged teenagers. But a woman beating a man? Pfft, fake. You're actually going to bring up logic in the same business that had a guy in a turkey suit pop out of a giant egg, or a Cajun cult leader with the power of teleportation, or a guy who was brought back from the dead and surrounded by dick druids? Oh, but a woman pinning a man for the 3 count is too topsy-turvy for some. Trying to argue logic in wrestling is futile because in that world, logic is a fluid concept. It's not uniform or unilateral. Logic is what you make it. The rules change literally from promotion to promotion, from the biggest all the way down to the smallest. So in some worlds, logically, men fighting women on equal footing makes sense. And I guess we'll just forget every action or superhero movie with a strong female lead kicking everybody's ass, man or woman. I guess you just can't buy into that. But the idea that a larger man could never lose to a smaller woman, man, I just don't have an answer to that one. If only there were hundreds of examples spanning decades to disprove the idea that size was the only thing that mattered in wrestling. Come on, people, surely some of you have lived long enough to have seen Rey Mysterio beat the Big Show on more than one occasion, and have we all just collectively forgotten one of the most cathartic, satisfying main events in WrestleMania history? Or the fact that this year alone, the winner of said main event went 2-0 against a guy whose entire gimmick was about how big he was? Okay, but all things being equal, in a fair fight, a woman could never beat a man, they say. That idea blows my mind because we you all know that's not true. Women have beaten up men before. That is a fact. Men, are you saying you don't know one woman in your life who could kick your ass if she was motivated enough? Are you saying that you, John Q. wrestling fan, could take on Becky Lynch or Ember Moon just based on the virtue of you being a man? What's one of the biggest things they teach in a judo or self-defense class? Use your opponent's size and momentum against them. Work smarter, not harder. In a wrestling match, a woman wouldn't have to be bigger or stronger than her male opponent, she just have to use better strategy. But intergender wrestling promotes domestic violence, you might say. If a man sees another guy beating up a woman in the ring, he might think it's okay to do that to a woman in real life, which, hey, of course. I've been using violence to solve my problems for the last 20 years because the wrestling show on the TV box told me it was okay. Obviously, domestic violence is a terrible thing, whether it comes from a man or a woman, but when done correctly, intergender wrestling promotes anything but that. Domestic violence is an act of emotion. It's done for control, but in a wrestling match, there theoretically is no emotion. When two people face off in the ring, it's depicted as an athletic competition between two consenting equals fighting to see who's the better person in the ring. No different from any other sport. Why can we have men fight men and women fight women and hold that up as an objective competition, yet if we dare mix the two, suddenly we're promoting nasty violence? Nobody called the cops after watching an intergender match on Lucha Underground saying they witnessed a crime, and that's a show where a lot of crimes have happened. Now I know what you're thinking. What about punching, kicking, choking, eye rakes, those staples of wrestling that would look bad if done in an intergender match? Well, first of all, that's already happening, so too late. Second of all, since you've established that a wrestling match is portrayed as an athletic contest and not a private act of domestic violence, those things should be considered above board the same they are in a same-sex match. But in case they aren't, there's a simple solution. Don't do those things in a match. You may not believe this, but it's entirely possible to have a wrestling match without throwing a single punch. If WWE has to pull a Saturday morning slam to make intergender wrestling more comfy for people to watch, they're totally able to do that. But what happens if the man loses, you might ask? His career would be ruined. He wouldn't be taken seriously ever again. I can only think of one man whose career never recovered after losing to a woman, Mark Marrow. But there's two reasons why that's a really bad example. One, the feud Marrow had with his wife Sable was so laughably one-sided that his career would have tanked no matter what gender his opponent was. And two, in terms of character, presentation, and in-ring style, Sable is the polar opposite of every woman in that company today. Marrow's career wasn't ruined because he lost to a woman once, he lost repeatedly to a woman who was barely a wrestler. That would never be the case today. And by the way, WWE has jobbers, don't they? Men and women whose sole mission is to lose and make their opponent look good. They're not going to hurt any. And if they need to be built back up, the company's usually able to pull that off. Remember how the B team got over as hell in as little as 3 weeks? People say that in an intergender match, it's impossible for a man to play the babyface, and I don't think that's true. Depending on the story you tell and the way you build up the match, it's entirely possible for a woman to play a heel. Besides, today, heels and faces in wrestling aren't the same as they used to be. All those shades of gray, remember? Heels don't always have to cheat and bite and scratch to win a match, much like babyfaces aren't always 100% clean in the ring. Today, so many of WWE's matches are so vanilla in terms of getting heat, it's entirely possible to have men and women portrayed in a neutral light. Look at what they did with the Cruiserweight and Mae Young Classics. And then people will inevitably jump to those obvious dream matches of Alexa Bliss versus Braun Strowman or Sasha Banks versus Brock Lesnar. Why are those two guys the first two names that always come up when people talk about the idea of intergender wrestling in the company, as if there aren't dozens of other more reasonable options? You don't do that with other jobs. You don't say to someone, hey, you're a short order cook, can you make a beef Wellington blindfolded? First off, I don't think Brock Lesnar would ever let himself get involved in an intergender match, unless it was against someone like Ronda Rousey, which I'm just saying, with enough build, would be totally badass. And by focusing only on the bigger guys, you're ignoring all these fantastic possibilities with average to smaller guys, like Finn Balor, Cesaro, Seth Rollins, Johnny Gargano, Velveteen Dream, or the entire 205 Live roster. And I'm not saying it has to start happening in WWE tomorrow. I'm not saying everyone has to do it. You can make it elective if you want, but my point is you build. You spend time building up the strength and the credibility and the legitimacy of your female superstars until one day, say, Becky Lynch or Nia Jax challenges The Miz or Baron Corbin. You're telling me you wouldn't want to see a match like that go down? And from there, you keep building. You add another intergender match here, another one there, and eventually it stops becoming a novelty. It just is. After seeing what the women of WWE did at Evolution, after witnessing their talent and strength and toughness and athleticism on display, how could anyone consider it outlandish or unrealistic to see women wrestling men? Who cares if biologically men are stronger than women? It's wrestling, it's storytelling, it's a fucking work. Anything can happen. Educate yourself. Go watch matches featuring Lufisto, Chuck Taylor, Jordan Grace, Ethan Page, Kimber Lee, Joey Ryan, Candice LeRae, Brian Cage, Tessa Blanchard, Matt Riddle, Mia Yim. Watch these matches and see what intergender wrestling is capable of. It's not domestic violence. It's not an embarrassment to men. It's so much more than shock value. It is strength. It is empowerment. It is equality. I'm not saying this would be easy. Change never is. It would be a long and difficult path to make it feel like a regular part of the show. All I'm asking you to do is for 1 minute, stop thinking about what the real world says about men and women and think about what the world of wrestling can provide. You want to be an agent of change, WWE? This is how you do it. So what do you think about intergender wrestling? Do you think we'll ever see it back in WWE? Let me know in the comments section below. Be sure to thumbs up this video if you like it, subscribe to Wrestling with Regret, and buy the t-shirts at ProWrestlingTees.com. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.